Okay, yes. So let's get into the other main thing we really want to cover. I'm going to move this mic a little closer to myself here, which is WWDC discussion. There were a lot of really interesting and big announcements, so I put together some slides, and maybe we can kind of, what we usually do in this format is I just kind of present like what that thing is. Maybe I'll give a little bit of my own interpretation about like the meaning or what's happening, but also try to leave a lot of stuff open for people to give their own input, and we'll move on. I forgot at least one really important one in my slides, which I realized this morning, so I'm just going to talk about that one first. So first of all, sign in with Apple. It doesn't have a slide, but should have. So people's thoughts about sign in with Apple, or who does not know. I'll give a brief overview. So sort of like you have sign in with Facebook, sign in with Google, Apple is going to provide a sign in with Apple that you can put inside of your app that will be just like a push one button and you're signed in. Some of the interesting aspects of it will be that, for example, you can generate email addresses per service. So if you don't actually want to share your email address with the service, then that is, you can have like maybe more privacy, and if you are annoyed at that service, you can just, not care about that email anymore and they go away. So some of the interesting things there is it maybe provides more privacy for people. The other thing that I think was kind of bold on Apple's part is that they're requiring it. If you have like a sign in with Google or a sign in with Facebook, you must also have sign in with Apple inside of your app as a requirement for when it rolls out, which means that they're actually they're forcing this on developers. So those are maybe some of the interesting points about it. Anyone have any thoughts about this? And use the mics if possible. I passed around a bunch of mics. The switch is on the bottom, but in this room I think it's usually better. It's a pretty big room, so if you have mics, just if people have stuff they want to say, and the switch is on the bottom, there should be like a little green LED light that you can see. If it's on, they're probably all off right now. All right, so we'll start.
Is it on? Okay.
Yeah, it is on.
I think I'm a fan of it. I used to use those features all the time before it was like, oh, now this company gets access to your entire Facebook or your entire Google.
Yeah.
Like I used to use them all the time because I don't want passwords. Like that's hassle. There was one annoying thing I remember with those where some services you would use that and then they would still ask you to set another password for them, and it was like, why did I do this?
Oh, yeah.
Like it just pre-filled information instead of like being your actual login. And it doesn't solve the problem of like, oh, I signed up for this with GitHub, but I accidentally clicked the one with Google, so now I have a different account and none of my stuff is here.
Yeah.
But overall, I think if a service has it and it's like a service I don't care that much about, then I'll probably, and it has signed with Apple, I'll do it. Whereas I won't do it with the Facebook or Google ones anymore.
Cool.
I think. Oh, sorry, right over here.
Cool.
Wow, this is really clear. I'll try to hold it further out. Apparently, my voice travels very far. I think it's going to lead to a lot of convoluted implementation. So not everyone is going to implement it the same way, because you can just use username and password, and then you won't have to implement sign-in with Apple ID. And so a lot of companies are probably going to do some sort of cost-benefit trade-off to see like what will allow them to continue to get the information that they want from users. But for users that understand it, it's going to be a good thing. But like whenever I think of something like this, I try to think, will my grandmother understand it? And yeah, I have a feeling people are going to see that and they're going to think like, oh, but this is a Google app, so if I sign in with Apple, does that work? So it's going to take time to implement. In 2 years, it'll probably be the greatest thing that they did for privacy and sign-in, but in the beginning, the adoption is probably going to be difficult and strange.
So you're thinking that enough companies will want the information that they will remove, like Facebook and Google, so that they can have, and just do username and password so they continue to get that information?
I think people are going to try to find a way to skirt around it. That's, yeah, like the way Uber was tracking like information that they weren't supposed to. Like people are going to try to find ways around it, and then it's going to lead to like changes to the App Store guidelines. So, like right now, they say that that you're required that they recommend putting it above the other sign-in buttons, and that you can use it with the others. But I have a feeling that those rules are like, as long as everybody collectively behaves, then they'll continue to have this like, we'll be okay with the other things as long as you do this, but then if people abuse it, then it's going to lead to some change, and they might require some different implementation entirely.
I do want to say, though, Apple has a little bit of a fine line to walk here, because the Department of Justice is starting to look at antitrust type things. So if Apple is sort of like, hey, you should only use Apple's thing and get rid of Google and Facebook's login, that starts to become like a stronger case against like, oh, are they using their monopoly position in order to impact the market and stuff?
They don't do that.
And I think the case went forward too, right? There was a case against Apple as the App Store is a monopoly, and I think it's going forward still. So yeah.
On the slides, do you have about that that you can connect media applications with Siri now?
No, I don't have that. Maybe we can talk about that for like.
Okay. Well, I was going to say that they did that as a result of, so hopefully mitigating that. So yeah, you're right that it is a fine line, because if they try to remove the ability for Google and Facebook to sign in, well, maybe Facebook is okay, but if they try to remove the ability for Google sign on, it's probably going to create some antitrust issues. But yeah, that's my thought.
Cool. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. On bottom.
Yes. I would trust Apple more if with this sign-in with the Apple thing, if I hadn't experienced so many problems in work where any sort of services related to Apple ID suddenly, like, you can't log in, or you have like problems with iTunes U or things that we experience on occasion, means, I mean, I think other companies like Google provide more uptime, and that really worries me. I'm actually kind of moving away at my work from wanting to depend on Apple's system where everything logs in through Apple ID. So like, it's good, but it's bad. They have billions of devices in the world and lots of data centers, but they're a prime target. I don't know what causes most of their downtime, if it's like hackers or what, but I don't know. I worry about that.
Yeah, Apple traditionally is still not as strong at web services. So cool. Anyone else? Any thoughts? Maybe. Is it on the bottom and the green light?
Okay.
Yeah, cool. That works too.
Yeah. I didn't watch the session. I don't have thought about it, but I have a question. Do they provide email if I do sign in with Apple or not?
Do they provide an email?
Yeah, like if I sign in with Facebook or Google, then they provide my email, and that's
right.
What my company try to register as your like primary mail ID.
I didn't look so deep into it. My understanding is that they will generate emails like per service, but maybe there are settings that you can customize that. Maybe someone knows better than I do.
So when the user like Face ID, you click the button and it does like a Face ID thing, and then it says like, what information do you want to give to this person? Like they're requesting your name, your email, and I think there's some other things. But the email, you have an option to say, just give them my real email, or give them a made up email, and that will forward to my real one.
Yeah, that answers my question. I think like then it will be really benefit. Then I can choose like, if this service I want to use my real address, then I would provide my real address, or then I would like some token or some generated email.
Unless Apple is the company you don't want to provide your real email address to. Anyway.
But they have it.
Yeah.
Apple ID.
Yeah, I know, they already have it. They're fine.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? Yes.
Okay, so just very quick, I feel like unless Apple enforce the use of the Apple login signing, I feel like Facebook and Google will still remain for a long time, because in my opinion those services are universal, meaning that whatever you use, any device, any computers, there will still be Facebook, there will still be Google's, but if you want to use Apple login, sorry, maybe it's too low. If you want to use Apple login, you may need an Apple device and an Apple account. So based on the application you use Apple login, then there are some times where you may not be able to log in with. So I don't know if people are thinking about it as well.
So it could cause like some type of fragmentation or something.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Any last thoughts? So yeah, this was, I think, a pretty big announcement, and it'd be interesting to see the impact that it has, because it's one of those cases where Apple's kind of really going after some of its competitors and the advantage that they have using the angle of privacy to approach it. So anyway, we'll see. All right, next topic, Mac Pro. Let's cover this first. So, who is going to buy a Mac Pro? Very small.
If my wife allows me.
Yeah.
It looks cool.
It does look cool.
It's not upgradable.
It's not.
Right? You can't. No, but you're locked into the number of CPUs you buy, right?
The CPU is detachable.
So I could buy
a 6-core or whatever, their minimum one, and then over the years I could upgrade.
That's what it seems like. Yeah.
Actually, we don't know about the processor yet, only the memory. They've only said that the memory, and that it has modules, but they never said that the CPU is actually one of the modules.
That's what I'm worried about. Like that price, and I can't upgrade it. That's just too much.
The press asked, and they said it's a socket.
It's a socket, yeah.
But you can't take it out. Only they can at the Apple Store.
It's not user replaceable, as they say.
They sell a $1,000 upgrade kit. Actually, there are.
We can pass the mics. If you have a mic, pass it around as people are talking.
So there are two different logic boards for the Mac Pro. One logic board has a maximum capacity of 1.5 terabytes, and the other one has a maximum capacity of 1 terabyte. So if you buy the 24 core or the 28 core, which probably costs as much as an apartment in Minato-ku, then you can upgrade to 1.5 terabytes. So because the capacities are different, I think that underneath there's probably some segmentation in the power supply and the type of board that they use. But the CPU, I guess, is socketed. But if you can only upgrade to 1.5 terabytes on 24 and 28, then I wonder if the lower end model cannot upgrade to 24 or 28 core processors, since I know for a fact that those processors have a very different thermal, like the TDP is different for those processors. So,
right.
Well, we don't know yet. We'll find out, I guess.
So you might have like local maximum what you can achieve with buying a particular one, but you can't go from like the cheapest to the most expensive. There's no path for that, maybe. Interesting.
$1,000 stand.
Yeah. And a screen with a $1,000 stand.
That literally comes with no stand.
Yeah. That was what they should have just said, was that it was like a screen that costs like they should have said the price of the screen is $1,000 more, and you can opt not to have the stand.
Yeah.
Then nobody would have complained, but they said it the other way.
But here's the thing: everybody's been waiting for an Apple display. How many people wanted a Thunderbolt replacement? Thunderbolt display replacement. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Like when they said we're gonna reach back to the
You have a mic on your table.
I have a loud voice.
I have a loud theatrical voice.
When they said they were gonna pander to the creative people, they're talking about the people who are like rendering movies and spending $1 bajillion to have like top of the line. So what about us? Are we not creative enough? Are we not pro enough? Like,
Really, what they're doing is they're asking the people who complain to put their money where their mouth is. So, for years, people were asking for a modular Mac Pro. They were asking for a 6K Apple branded display. Now you got it. Go to your bank, get a loan.
We're nerds. We're never going to stop complaining. Apple knows that. But yeah, I mean, I would have been happy with just like the iMac Pro 5K display in its own box.
Yeah.
Like that screen is cool, but it's not for any of us.
Yeah.
Except when you turn it in
Yeah.
portrait and you can watch all of your code. That was awesome. If it had touch, it would be even
rotation.
better.
You can do
Yeah.
that with any monitor, you know.
Yeah, I do that with the LG one now.
Get a $30 stand from Amazon.
But those stands don't have magnets, okay?
And weight balancing hinges.
I think Apple knows that the people who are going to use Macs are going to use Macs, and they can charge them as much as they want, practically.
Yeah, this is pretty extreme. I was looking up because I remember when I was in high school, like they would come out with the really cool 22-inch LCD. Wow, I've never seen a flat screen that big. And then you're like, oh my god, it's. I was looking at the prices, but they were like $3,000, $3,200, $3,300, and now this one comes out and it's $6,000. It's like, wow, Apple's really upgraded their pricing scheme over the years.
But it's but it's not a typical monitor. That's the point.
Yeah. It's
But
true.
like it's an insanely powerful monitor, and if Apple is truthful in their announcement, then they're comparing with like studio level reference monitors, which cost like $43,000. I think they quoted.
Right.
So obviously this is not a monitor for us, which is just disappointing because those number of creative people that will spend that much money can't be that many people. I mean, I don't want that nasty, ugly, LG.
Ultra-fine
Yeah,
display?
the ultra-fine display like that they put out when they got rid of the Thunderbolt display. I mean, it had bugs and problems too, right? Like blocking Wi-Fi or strange things. I want an Apple-designed monitor that looks like my MacBook Pro to put next to my MacBook Pro.
Just so everyone knows, the closest competitor in color accuracy and gamut accuracy to the XDR display costs $29,000.
Okay.
Wow.
So the same with like when the iMac Pro came out, people said comparatively configured PCs would be like $7,000. Like the pricing, Apple's pricing is actually good for what it is. It's just probably not what most of us need. So there's a large majority of us that would like an in-between product.
Lots of things to cover, so we'll,
Okay.
if you want one more comment or so, but cool, all right. So another thing that happened was that the iPadOS was split out into its own operating system. Thoughts or impressions about what that means?
I'm very curious to know what that means.
Yeah.
Because, like, for example, the new UI scene stuff, like for the multiple windows or scenes.
Yes.
They're not windows, they're scenes.
They're Windows scenes.
Windows.
API.
UI scene delegate. Like, can you use that on the iPhone? Like, and just assume you have one scene, or is it like you have to if-def, like if iPadOS use UI application delegate?
When I looked, I did actually check the docs for that, and it looked like the Windows scene. So we're talking, this is going to come later in the slides as well, but it relates here. So there's a new capability, so you can basically have like, in your app, you can have like multiple windows. So like, for some apps are like documents, like mail, for example. Sometimes it'd be nice to be able to do 2 emails and see both of them at the same time.
You can see 2 emails at once?
Yeah.
Whoa.
So the deal is, as I understood it, that API, which is called UI Window Scene, is going to be available for both iOS and for iPad, but it makes more sense in iPad because of the fact that you can do like split screens and stuff like that. But apparently it is also available from the way the docs made it sound. It was also available for iOS.
It would make it really annoying if they're like, no, now you have to make it like the Mac version and the iPad version and the iOS version, and they're all different.
Right, but now the iPad version can be the Mac version, so anyway, talked about that too. Cool. I also thought mouse support was interesting, although I'm really curious how that works. Apparently it supports mice now.
Yep, it's an accessibility.
Yeah, so that's kind of fascinating.
Is it just USB or wireless as well?
Wireless.
Oh.
Is it wireless?
Any
It
mouse?
said? I wrote USB, but you're right, maybe it was more than just USB.
It's what you can just, the magic mouse
Okay.
just becomes a little circle that moves around and taps on things.
Yeah, this is kind of adjacent to the mouse support, but they had a WWDC talk on like the design changes in iOS and macOS, and like especially for iOS, it's like a lot of just interactions are different now, and they're like really deprecating, not deprecating, but like force touch is like, don't do the peek and pop thing. They have this new UI contextual menu thing, and like, oh, just so handy that this supports long press automatically or force touch. Oh, and if you right click on it, it's a contextual menu on the Mac, and it's just like, oh, how handy that this just magically appeared, this compatibility feature.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Among the things that I think are interesting, though, is that because they've separated out as a separate thing, I feel like now they're going to have to talk about it each year. Like, to some degree, people talk about how the iPad versus the iPhone has maybe received less attention, or like, you know, as people are trying to make it more and more of a work device, there's kind of limitations that they hit that are kind of natural because of the interaction model of the phone, which is just has a smaller screen and other things. So I do think that splitting it out does sort of address and maybe sends the message that they're paying attention to the iPad and the specific things that you might want to do with it.
I have one question for everybody, because I installed the beta yesterday.
Okay.
On an extra iPad, and I tested it. The swiping on the bottom, the switch between your slide over views is really cool. You can kind of see all your open slide over views, but you still need to have an app open, swipe up on the dock, hope that app you want to open, the icon is in there so that you can drag it to the side to open a new slide. Is there something I'm missing? Is there an easier way to queue up apps in the slide over?
Just jailbreak your device.
Like, it's really complicated.
Yeah, your icon isn't there, it's annoying.
Yeah, I was hoping that they had solved that somehow. But what are you going to do? I'm going to go to Safari and open it up. But then I'm going to jump over to my dictionary and open it up and switch back, and then swipe up on my dock so that the icon is showing, and then put it. It's too complicated.
Going back to what you were saying about the iPadOS and what it means for the future of iOS, I think what happened internally is that they probably got really comfortable with where iOS was in terms of its scalability, and they realized that they could just extend UIKit to contain extra behavior in terms of like the iPad hardware's like concurrency abilities and extended GPU capabilities. So it's basically iOS, but it's just added behavior, and like it's basically a UIKit extension that you can use for iPadOS. So you can do the same things in iPadOS that you can do for an iPhone, but you have some more added capability.
Yeah.
So that's probably the same thing that they're going to do with macOS. So iPadOS is probably the beginning of Marzipan and the ability to build iOS for Mac.
Yeah, I'm really...
Mike over here.
Yeah, so there's a recent interview with Craig Federighi who confirmed exactly as much. He was saying that the reason that they split it off was for a lot of the power usage of iPad, and so they've developed this to allow developers to spend more time investing in an iPad only experience that may benefit from having the same functionality on a Mac. So from Craig's interview, he's like, yeah, we keep finding that all these great experiences on an iPad seem to be benefited by also being on a Mac, so we're trying to enable that sort of product.
Well, I guess people were complaining about like the latest Mac Pro, iPad Pro is really powerful machine, but the OS is limiting it. The hardware is really powerful, but so they needed an OS because people were comparing MacBook and iPad Pro, whether it can be a real laptop or it's still iPad with just really powerful hardware, but no way of using the hardware. So I guess iPad OS is just exploiting that hardware because now it's providing that double support. So MacBook Pro can use an iPad as an extra display. So which is really nice because I love sketching. So what I used to do is sketch on the iPad and somehow convert the files and pass it to the MacBook Pro. But now I can just share it as a new screen and the pencil support is already there. Just pass it and just pass it into MacBook Pro, which is really nice. So I guess it's a one step more forward towards making iPad really powerful, in par with the MacBook Pro. So I guess that's nice. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Maybe last person on this topic.
Wait, so I think just to mention what Lee pointed out, I think maybe if the thing is not in your dock on your iPad and you want to kind of use a split view, if you do like the command space like you do on Mac, you can see the, I don't know how to call this screen.
Spotlight.
The spotlight screen on your iPad, right? And then you can search up your app there and then drag that icon that pops up from there. So I'm hoping that that'll be possible in the queues or stacks, whatever they call it, on the iOS 13 as well. So hopefully, yeah.
I'll try it.
Yeah. Another thing I'm wondering is, since they're having like a mouse support, like has anyone tried like using the remote desktop access using iPad? So is there a way to send in like those command and option keys from your iPad device? Because I wasn't able to do it.
So sending the commands from the...
Like the command key and option key?
From your MacBook.
From my iPad to, yeah, Mac.
Oh, so like reversing the input, so from iPad to Mac?
Yeah, so like...
No, so I think it's just basically, it only acts as a mirror to your MacBook. So the only time, from what I've experienced, the Sidecar app is a mirror only. And you only get back to like the iPad OS once you swipe up and get back to your home screen.
Oh.
But otherwise, I don't think that there's any really great input from the screen back to your Mac, because you can barely even touch on the screen to register an input on like a web page. You can do it like poorly with your pencil, but with your finger, it's still shit.
For context, we're talking about Sidecar? Yeah. Okay. Maybe that wasn't clear. There's a new macOS feature called Sidecar, which allows you to use your iPad as a second monitor for your Mac, which is cool, and was something a couple of third-party companies were doing that Apple has taken from them, as they are prone to do. So don't have good ideas relating to how to use Macs and iPads, because Apple will take them eventually.
I had a question about the shell replacement.
Uh-huh.
Oh, no.
Oh, we'll go back. We've already jumped to macOS Catalina, and that's fine.
Is that okay?
Yes.
So I remember back in the early days of OS 10, I think the shell was like TCSH or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And then they switched to Bash, and it was like, thank God, like, everything else uses Bash. Like, why can't we just have this? And I'm not a big command line user, so I don't really know, like, why they're all that different. But I know that when you have scripts that assume you're in Bash, then they break when you're not. Sometimes.
Yes, although you can always just run those scripts by typing bash space and then that script.
So, but I'm just wondering, why are they changing it? Does it like?
It's got
GPL. That's the reason. There's no.
Oh, really? Okay, it's like a open source issue.
Tab completion. Really good tab.
Yeah, I mean.
Oh, I'm not saying Z shell isn't a more advanced shell than Bash, but the reason is that it's GPL, and Apple's been getting rid of GPL software from macOS for a long time.
That makes sense. Tab completion does not make sense. Like, why would they do that?
I mean, before this, you could ask the question, why hasn't Bash been updated in macOS since 2007? Reason, because they didn't want to have the one that was relicensed, I think GNU GPL 3.0.
Now I know.
So eventually it was just Bash is now so old. The version that came with macOS is so old that they were just like, we're going to do a different shell. But yeah, Z shell has more features than Bash as well. That's true as well.
Because we've had this discussion like in our Slack, like
yes.
I use fish shell, but I don't set it as my default shell because then it breaks my scripts. I just have the terminal run fish shell so I get the better tab completion.
Oh.
So then when Xcode runs scripts or whatever, it's just running in Bash and everything works. So
right.
I believe at the top of your shell file, your script, you can specify something that'll make it run bash, and you won't have to put bash in terminal. I believe. Yeah. There's like a first line.
Oh, you can do.
And you
You
can
mean
specify.
like the slash.
Yeah, and then
slash bin slash sh. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and then you won't have to specify because when that script runs, it'll just use bash.
I use fish as my main shell, but I want to make points like if you want to use bash, you can just type bash and then bash becomes your shell, or other things like that. So a lot of people use that as a reason not to use fish, but it's so trivial to like just switch that it's. I mean, I just want to make a point that you can use multiple, like a Unix system, you can switch back and forth between shells very easily. They're all just different programs.
Yeah.
So that's
Fish
easy.
is worth the effort.
I like it. But there's a lot of good points with Z shell too. I mean, there are all good reasons to use all of them. Yeah. Z shell was like the modern shell of the 80s. And like fish is like the modern shell of the 90s. So like this is where we are with these things. Cool. We kind of did jump to macOS Catalina. I do want to cover some of the other stuff that we have that is probably worth talking about. One big one is Catalyst. So Catalyst is what we were previously calling Marzipan, and is basically now if you make an iPad app, you can compile that iPad app for Mac, and it will also run as a Mac app. What is most surprising to me about this WWDC is prior to WWDC, that was the thing that everybody was thinking about, and then when WWDC actually happened, that became more of like a side note. So that's kind of an interesting development because I guess everyone was thinking, oh, you know, we're going to have this influx of like iOS apps into the Mac platform, and maybe a lot of iOS developers are going to use that to port their things. Now it's pretty clear that SwiftUI is going to be the way that you, if you wanted to share code in terms of, you know, iOS and Mac code, you're probably going to write that in SwiftUI, and Catalyst is probably not really the future of that. It's probably more of like a thing you could do like today if you want to move something, but it's probably, if you're writing something new or thinking long term about what your app is going to be doing, you probably should be thinking about SwiftUI instead. Anyway, that was my take on Catalyst.
Yeah.
So I was almost like, why'd they bother releasing it? But anyway, I had a feeling it's like there's two different projects happening in Apple in the same time to achieve the goal of putting iOS apps onto the Mac, and SwiftUI won, but they were like, well, we're going to release Catalyst anyway.
Yeah. It's like, I didn't expect them to be merging everything all on all these different planes all at the same time. It's almost like if they released Garbage Collection and Arc at the same time, and they're like, let's see who wins.
Yeah.
Instead of like having one fail for a long time and then replacing it.
First C's.
Oh, sorry.
But most people are not going to run out and rewrite their entire apps that exist now just because SwiftUI is there. SwiftUI will be great for new apps, but
3 years.
Yeah, it's going to take some time.
Yes.
But for now, I mean, people can bring existing iPad apps to Mac, and I think that's great. Relatively easily.
Is there a separate slide on SwiftUI?
Yes. I was going to ignore that one. I didn't think it was that important. So. No, it's more of like, I have to watch the clock and be like, if we haven't gotten to SwiftUI yet, I'm going to have to like navigate over there and just like, not important, CryptoKid, who cares? No.
So I think that one of the main reasons why it's happening now is because of more integration of Metal into macOS, because that allows them to use like the same iOS graphics runtime. So like, because if you look, one of the things that they talked about is that Xcode 11 in macOS Catalina, it uses Metal for the simulator. So like it's actually much faster. I think they said like 90% less CPU usage. So that there's probably some relation with like the Metal API and then being able to use like iPad applications native.
Sure, that makes sense.
I think the remaining CPU usage goes to Bird. It just eats your whole CPU.
I was going to say though, Catalyst, I feel like if you haven't had your CPU like bogged down, Bird is usually syncing to iCloud. That's why I say that. Anyway, but Catalyst, I think is if you want more than 10 rows in your table view, you would use Catalyst. Otherwise, you can use
Yes,
Swift UI.
that is a weird limitation of Swift UI. A list can't have more than, is it a list? Can't have more than, or a stack view can't have more than 10 items.
It's something like that. Really.
Yeah, yeah, it was like a weird restriction that was like, wonder why you would do that. But anyway.
Sorry, I know we're still in Catalina, but I'm just so happy that they changed table view to list in iOS because table views in iOS are not table.
Yeah, they're definitely like single column. They're tables if your table only is one dimensional. So, cool. All right.
Sorry.
Yes.
One little. I wonder if the opposite is possible. Like, let's say you created a Mac OS application using the AppKit APIs. Is it possible to maybe make it an iPad application somehow?
No, I think basically with extreme difficulty, you'd probably be trying to figure out more like, I have this AppKit app, how can I isolate as much code as possible such that it could be reused and then used with UIKit or something. But I think it'd be really hard to go the other way. And Apple Catalyst provides you basically a one-way iPad to Mac type thing, but not really anything the other way. But with a Mac, there's a whole lot more like, what would I say, like mouse clicks. There's a whole lot of things that would be like, how would you go about translating that user experience, like resizing windows and things like that. Some of it you could do, but some of it would probably be a challenge. Like, what are your menus going to do? Your menu bar is like not there. So that type of problem, I think, would exist as well.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else? I just want to point out that if you like using the scripting language runtimes, like the version of Ruby and Python that comes with your Mac, that those are also going to be removed. I don't know if that actually matters that much, but yes.
One more. Anyone in the group at all worried or cares at all about the read-only system partition in Catalina?
I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Seems good to me, but
This is then my additional security and
yeah,
protection thing.
Last bullet point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that mean if you have a Hackintosh, you can't edit your texts?
Oh, but they don't want you to make kernel extensions anymore.
No, that's not completely true, but yeah, they're going that way.
I have so many,
as much as possible.
So many questions like, is /library writable and just /system is not? I'm so confused.
Did you watch the video?
I watched, like, which one?
On advances
Did you
in
even watch?
Advances in file system.
No, I didn't.
Okay. So is it on still? Okay. Basically, they will make 2 volumes on your disk, and they will move the system stuff over there, and that will be read only. And you can do something to kind of unlock it, but anytime you reboot, it's going to go back to read only. And then apps and data are in the read writable area. And then they created something called a firm link, which is a bidirectional link between.
That's different than a hard link.
Yep, yeah, it's not a hard link, it's not a soft link, it's not a sim link, it's a firm link.
Okay.
So basically, from what, as a user, we're not gonna see any of this. It's just gonna look like your Mac. Everything's gonna be the same, but underlying, they're doing some
But
magic.
so it's /application/Safari read only, but /application/my
No, the applications are in the.
Oh, so you can
It's
modify.
it's the kernel. It's the system software is in its
So
own.
it's really only the deep down.
Yeah,
So
which is
we can still
probably
modify
the
it.
place you want to protect more than anything.
Well, like someone could hack your Safari. I don't know.
Cool. But yeah, I mean, I do think Apple's doing a ton of things to really lock down security, and if you're the type of user who wants to be able to like recompile your kernel or something, you're probably just not going to be a Mac user in the future. Know that that's the way things are going, and I think we're just going to see more and more of that. So.
One thing that worries me about Catalyst is that it could be a precursor to the future where they no longer allow people to compile just basic x86 applications that can be installed outside of the App Store. So it might be a way for like the Mac OS team to be working towards like a future where if you want to install a Mac OS application, you have to go through their like application or storefront.
Although they did have, I mean, I think they did have enough backlash against the Mac App Store, and they provided like the signing. What was it called?
Notarization.
Yeah, like a notarization service last year. So I kind of feel like with the Mac, it's going to be like you can still sell it outside of the store, like the Mac OS store, but they have the notarization so that if it's like actually like malicious, Apple can still like deactivate it and stuff like that. I think that's where that will be on the Mac platform. So cool. I'm gonna move on to some other stuff. Anyone have anything on this? No one feels so passionately about Watch OS 6. Anything about Xcode 11 anyone was interested in?
Does it crash?
Does it crash? Does it crash less than before?
You can use JetBrains plugins.
Oh, it's a package cool.
No, sadly you can't.
I was going to say, I didn't hear that.
I wish.
The editor, the new editor.
There is a new editor though, right? Yeah.
What's it called? I think it's called Test Result Bundle thing. That looks really cool. Like you can, you'll be able to share it and put it on radars or whatever, and they can see the entire state from when the crash or whatever it is that your packaging happened. So I think it will make it easier to report and resolve issues. And the preview thing was cool with how that's related to Swift UI, but yeah, that was pretty nice.
It's like the live updating while you type, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll definitely cover that in Swift UI. We'll get to Swift UI. So.
Has anyone here actually downloaded and used the Xcode 11 beta? Anyone?
Got two.
Also,
any impressions over there? Oh, there's two more. They've clustered for some reason.
And keep your hand raised if you did it in the Mac OS beta, like the actual 10.15 Xcode 11 beta, both together. One. Okay.
I'd love to hear impressions.
I've also used it, but all that.
Okay. You're the outlier.
Yeah, it's really impressive. Try it out.
Any comparisons between Xcode 11 on Catalina versus like Xcode 10 or 11 on Mojave or older?
Well, I've been using it for about a year, so can't really give a very good explanation about that. But the preview is a game changer in my opinion.
So just so anyone's like, well, they're going to talk about it in Swift UI, but the preview isn't just like update while you're writing code in Swift UI. You can actually press play on the preview and you can do navigation. So if your Swift UI has navigation items implemented, then when you play the Swift UI preview, you can actually tap on list items and you can move forward in the navigation. It supports multiple views, so you can actually create like a dark mode preview and like a regular mode preview and even a preview with like dummy data all along the same preview. So like it's pretty cool. You should check it out. But Xcode 11 has a lot of performance improvements, and it also has like multitasking improvements. You can create like inside of your code editor, you can maximize the editor that you're inside and then like collapse it and go back into the multi-editor view that you were in before. So basically like if you had multiple monitors because you wanted to edit a really big file, but you didn't want to lose assistant mode, you can actually have multiple editors open along with the preview, and then it's kind of like the Safari Maximize window button, but you tap that and then it expands the current editor that you're inside, but then once you're done, you can just minimize it. So you don't have to have like multiple tabs open to maintain multi-window workflow.
All right, anyone else? Anything on Xcode 11? Move on to, okay, here's a couple of maybe interesting features. Anyone know background tasks? So you now have the ability to kind of run even potentially like long-term tasks. I mean, we had some background capability, but it's been extended. Among the examples that Apple gave was if you want to train your machine learning model locally for like 15 minutes, you can sort of allocate some time to do that in the background. And it could be like, you know, I'm going to do this at night when like the phone is connected to the power source and it's like 4 a.m. so it's not, you know, bothering anybody probably unless they stay up really late, like that kind of thing. So that was another interesting development. You have comments?
Yeah, I haven't watched the details on this talk, so I don't know what they've added. But like this API so far is like Apple expects, oh, we'll do things in the background that's invisible to the user. But I'm really curious if they'll ever do something, especially like on iPad, where say you are like if you're using it as a professional and you're making like say a Final Cut Pro video and you need to export it, right?
Yeah.
That's a long-running task.
Render that for like 3 hours.
That you shouldn't have to just like let your iPad sit there with the screen on in Final Cut Pro to do. You should be able to close it and have the task complete in the background while you're in Safari or the screen is off or whatever. And so I'm wondering if they'll ever do a background task that's not invisible to the user, where like I'm doing this thing, this render, and I expect it to finish, and I have a progress bar.
So it could be like it's rendering, I have closed the app, but it's still rendering in the background, and maybe after an hour I receive a notification, like your rendering is done or something. I don't know, I didn't know if it had the ability to like, you know, post a notification when it was finished or something, but might be worth looking into that. That would be useful though for that type of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I'm gonna move on to Combine. Does anyone know what Combine is? Yeah, so Combine, has anyone been using like Reactive Swift or RX Swift or some reactive functional framework? Yes, had some experience with that. So Apple made one basically. So now you don't have to use those, you can use Apple's instead. Point number 2 I want to make about Combine, which is also a point I would have made if Swift UI came first, was way back when Swift was first announced, people were asking questions about what's the status of Objective-C versus Swift. And Apple's official reply at that time was that they are both first-class languages in the iOS platforms. This must have been 5 years ago, same basic WWDC thing. So I said, well, what we should probably do is wait for when Apple releases a Swift-only framework. So Combine and SwiftUI are Swift-only frameworks, which makes me feel as now is the communication that Apple is sending that Objective-C is probably becoming a second-class framework. Maybe they didn't say that, but that would be, like, to me, the thing we should... I've been paying attention to this for years. Like, they always announce something new. When does Apple announce something that's actually Swift-only? And this was the year when something Swift-only was announced. So I think that's a thing we should pay attention to as well. Yes?
When they had the marzipan thing last year, it's like, oh no, AppKit is still good. Like, we're still going to update it. And all the Mac people were like, oh god, no. And now this year, they're like, oh, we have Swift UI, but UIKit and AppKit are still good. And everyone's like, wait, what's happening?
I think we all know that whenever Apple announces something new, eventually whatever you're using now is going to go away. That is basically true. But the thing is, whenever they announce it, it's usually too early to use for every use case. So they have to play this game of like, well, you should still using this thing because you have this use case and we haven't gotten around to making this thing good enough for what you're going to need. So they have to play this game for a couple of years, but we all kind of know where things are going.
Don't worry, 64-bit carbon is coming.
If you guys want to do something fun, go back to older iOS SDKs and search for the Combine framework inside of Apple's private libraries. You'll be surprised how far back Combine has existed.
Interesting.
RealityKit and ARKit have been one of the first private Apple APIs to adopt Combine, so it's been around for a long time. But it's really cool. It has back pressure.
Yeah, that is cool, actually.
Back pressure is when you subscribe to like an observable sequence, and when you get your first signal back, you actually get an integer that tells you how many signals are going to come back. But with RX Swift, you just get back like the data that you're trying to admit. But yeah, back pressure is pretty cool.
It basically has to do with it's a reactive framework. So you've got these things like you're observing something, and then you're getting messages when it changes. So depending on the speed at which it changes, like if something is dumping like lots of notifications quickly and your observers are like firing like crazy, then you have the situation where you might be receiving more information than you have the speed to notify the observers. Those are the cases where like back pressure matters because you can kind of buffer the like what has been put in versus what's coming out. And it's necessary in server applications more so. This is like something they actually might need to do. Like you could literally have events that are firing so quickly that you don't have enough time to like post all the notifications, and you end up like dropping notifications or something. That's when back pressure, it's usually not something that's come up in mobile frameworks, but usually you don't have that problem so much in mobile. But it is a thing that, anyway, is interesting that they have it. So that's the reason why it exists, is it's a buffering capability, so that if you're receiving tons of events, you can kind of not drop them and still notify all the observers, basically.
Also, Combine was built 100% on Swift Foundation, so all of Swift's data structures and classes are supported by Combine, so it's really fast.
Cool. All right, we're going to move on. Okay, remember how I said I might skip CryptoKit? So anyway, if you do any cryptographical thing, which you might need to do, you should look at this now, because that's the way you should do it. driverkit. Maybe I should pause here just slightly, since people were worried about their ability to write kernel extensions. So driverkit is a C++ framework for writing drivers that you should use now instead of writing kernel extensions in some cases, and it runs those kernel extensions in kind of the user space rather than in like the system, so that provides enhanced security. If you're writing drivers and stuff, you should look at that. That's all I'll say there. There's a new logging framework.
Again?
Yeah. This is kind of cool.
That's cool.
Does someone else want to say what this is?
It's reusable images that you can use within the application, like thousands, 15,000. I don't remember the number.
Yeah.
They basically represent.
It's like an icon font.
Yeah.
And you can have all the icons. They have them filled in or not filled in, so good for like click states or other showing various other things. But they also have them. They're all vector, so you can scale them to any size. And even they support different weights, which is kind of incredible. So if you have like bold text next to them, they won't look too skinny. And yeah, it just seems really cool. Like one of my favorite things when working on Mac apps is like NS Image actually has a lot of built-in icons on the Mac, but on iOS there's none except for like UI bar button, and you can't use that anywhere. So I'm glad that they have this official solution now. And apparently there's ways to put your own icons into this, and it'll work in the similar system. So I'm not quite sure how that works, but
because it's a font, so is it saying like if they?
It's also images. You can do it either way.
Okay, yeah.
So basically, designers can use an SF symbol font to put those images easily with text into like Photoshop and stuff.
Right.
But when it comes to it, they say you cannot use it as a font in development. Instead, you use like image, system name, something.
So you basically have to turn the font into an image representation and use that inside your app.
Yeah. So there's an app from Mac called SF Symbols, I believe, which you can actually create from a template. For example, like they have a basic circle one. You can actually take that as a template and extend the design, and you can set the icon for each font weight and stuff, and basically package up your own symbol to add.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like the emoji. You can build your own emoji. You can build your own.
But it's more customizable. Like emoji aren't vector, and they don't support weights.
And you set a baseline for your symbol too, so that it looks nicely next to text and stuff. So.
All right. So this is very useful if you're doing icons in your app. You don't have to keep building your own icons for a lot of the real standard iOS use cases. Okay, there we got there. So SwiftUI, which is probably the reason why everyone's here, right? Let's be clear. Like, all right. So. Apple introduced SwiftUI. It is a new UI framework that will replace, probably, in the future.
No,
just
great,
spoilers, spoiler warning. That will probably be the future of the platform in terms of UI. So if you're using UIKit or AppKit right now, you can probably continue to do so for a little bit of time, because I think there's still some rough spots, like stack views that can't have more than 10 items, but it's probably the way that things are going.
So
yes,
I'm curious with SwiftUI why it's quote-unquote SwiftUI, but they still had to use the Swift DSL feature because it's not really Swift, it's like a special domain-specific language in Swift. Like no, but like, did you see the example where they build the HTML DSL? That builds HTML, and you're like, wow, this syntax is really close to SwiftUI. Like there's, because you have the big closures, many returns, but there's no return statement, no commas, no arrays, no. It's not like standard Swift syntax. So I find that very interesting.
My understanding of the situation was, you're right. If you saw SwiftUI, which the first time I saw SwiftUI, I was a little bit like, how did they do that in Swift? That's like a syntax error all over the place. So actually, they've added language features to Swift that are going to be included in Swift, but nobody knew was coming, which, because it's supposed to be an open source project, was a little bit, anyway, because I read the forum in the Swift, I was curious about that. I was like, wait, I didn't know that the features that they were going to introduce to Swift existed. So they kind of added these features to Swift quietly, kind of told the Swift community, like, by the way, this, like 5.2 or something's going to have these things, which happen to be exactly what SwiftUI needs in order to build like this DSL and some other stuff. But it will be part of Swift and could be used for other stuff too, as I understand it.
But interestingly, some of the features are, I mean, they're in Swift 5.1.
Right.
Like the one guy, the one Apple developer kept coming back to community evolution with the
property delegate, maybe?
Yeah. With like at state and stuff. Like they've been pushing that so many times, and then people keep poo-pooing it in the community, but Apple didn't really care. So they just revised it because in the end it was used in SwiftUI. But that's kind of neat. Like maybe a lot of us couldn't have imagined why we needed that, but then Apple just came out and showed a really cool example of why the feature was important, and the like single line return stuff. And,
right.
And some view.
Just to point out, like this is not new. This has been a trend over the past couple of years. Android has had something like this. Onco. Declarative UI has been a trend that has been building in the industry, and it's awesome that we can now leverage this, but this has been a long time coming.
Sure. To be clear, it's actually React.js, maybe, or maybe you could even say QML or something like that, which is a it's like using like Linux sometimes. They also have like a declarative syntax. Actually, Apple's reacting to the industry here. They're not driving it. Like my opinion of SwiftUI was Apple's probably been watching as the conversation has become, it's too expensive to make a cross-platform app. It's so much easier to use React Native or more recently Flutter, which is exactly this type of framework to do stuff. And so the conversation has been moving over there. So I think Apple had to respond to that, because one thing about those is the ability to like type the code and see it like, if you actually develop in that way, it's just faster than interface splitter. Like it's like 3-5 times faster to do that. And I think Apple had to respond to that trend because they really were behind in UI. So I mean, that's one aspect of it, is they are catching up, even though what they built is really kind of interesting and maybe has some, in that world of declarative UI, maybe they chose some interesting things, but broadly speaking, they're catching up to where the industry had been going. I think John's right on that point. Any other comments on SwiftUI? A couple of people have gotten a chance to try it. I will finally get a chance today. Finally. Mics. Where are the mics? There's one. I only see one anymore. 2. There were 4. Does someone have a mic in their pocket right now? Please return your microphones. Yeah.
Does anyone know if SwiftUI has some limitation in terms of performance? I'm thinking about all the stuff we do every day, like image decoding, corner radius, shadows. When you have a list and many cells and complex layouts, I feel like it can be kind of heavy to run on the main thread. And that's why there are some libraries such as texture. I don't know if someone knows about it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, texture, yeah.
it's made by engineers from Facebook and Pinterest, where basically all of the heavy UI works is run off the main thread. So I was just thinking if SwiftUI has still the same issue about that, or if they are doing things differently.
I don't know how it works specifically, but they claim in the videos that it's performance. So it's probably something that they looked into.
Everything, everything in SwiftUI is a struct, which implements the view protocol. So they're really lightweight, and everything is like kind of a, is it decorator pattern? When you kind of encapsulate a view on top of a view. They call them modifiers, but you can like take like a text, and then you can dot shadow, which is basically just calling like an initializer for a view that's going to wrap the next view, and they just layer on top of each other. But those things are actually just really lightweight structs with no inheritance hierarchy, and there's nothing to add overhead there. And then the SwiftUI engine basically takes that and compiles it down into a really efficient data structure and then renders it out, which is why you can write SwiftUI that eventually can be used in multiple places. And did you add the thing about bug report?
Bug report? No, I didn't.
Yeah, so bug report is dead. It's now called like feedback assistant or something. Okay. It looks the same basically, but I wish they would have announced that you could take SwiftUI and also generate like a HTML website that runs on a magic SwiftUI server. That would have been cool. Anyways, but it's very efficient. You just add one-line calls that add padding or add shadows or things like that, and it all compiles down to something that Apple will present efficiently.
But isn't it more like in a syntax way better? What about behind the scene? Like, there are still some rendering works going on, right?
Yeah.
As far as I know, it's magic. And
I think in the video they actually said that it gets rendered down to a single view. So you have many views, but they get rendered down to a single one. And it's the same thing that they do with the Android views as well, is they get compiled down to a single view. So you may have a very expensive view with many subviews in your code, but eventually they just are made into a single piece. So it's not expensive.
I guess we have to test it.
Yeah, to some degree you're just going to have to check and see, but Apple claims that it's performant.
Good. Yeah, I'm kind of wondering how complete it is. Like, I was playing with it with a coworker, and like you can do like list and braces to create a list table view. But like we typed in collection, and it was like, oh, there's no initializers for this.
Okay.
And like, oh, okay. Is that coming in the next beta, or?
That's how it was to use Swift 1.0, like day one, if I remember. So it's probably where we are right now. Any more comments?
Actually, when they were doing the tutorial for SwiftUI and they were going to deep dive into it, a lot of the presenters that work for Apple had to manually type like the initializers and syntax. So it looks like maybe SourceKit, it's not 100% there yet.
Right.
But yeah, we just got the first beta, so probably before July or so, it'll probably be more improved.
Cool. All right, I'm going to move on because I only have about 5 minutes left. This might be interesting to some people. If you have a core data model, there's like a way to do synchronization via CloudKit. The last time Apple tried this with the iCloud. Yeah, that's the thing. The last time Apple tried to do a similar type of thing, it did not go well.
Is that what that used to be like NS Ubiquitous Store or something?
Yeah, the iCloud core data thing.
Is there a video that they have for covering this?
I think so, yeah. So anyway, maybe of interest. The Windows scene we kind of mentioned briefly, so now your app can actually have like multiple windows. You don't just launch it and have one. You can spawn windows. Particularly useful on iPad because you can have like your document-based app have two side-by-side documents and stuff like that. Okay, that was my last thing, and we only have 4 minutes, so that's good. Anyone else have anything they wanted to talk about? Yes.
Pencil kit.
Oh yeah, pencil kit. There you go.
So for those of you who are unaware, Apple finally created a pencil kit, so you can basically do more implementation using like the Apple Pencil for iPad, which is really cool.
You just need 3 lines of code. That's it.
Cool.
Easier than Swift UI.
And I think I heard someone say that the data objects you get from PencilKit are codable, so you can just save them to disk. Reload them later.
Oh.
And so it's like very easy to do like collaborative drawing and things that you can just send them over the network from memory.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else have something they wanted to raise? Yeah?
It's more of a question.
So I heard, well, I know from some experience and from other people's experience that developing for the watch right now is a real pain in the ass. But I heard that something either with SwiftUI or iOS 13 or the new watchOS, they've made it a lot better. I don't know any details though, so I was wondering if anybody does.
So they basically improved the way that you can test the applications for watchOS. So forgot what they said, but it has to do with something similar to Simulator, that you can run the applications inside of a real like watchOS system. So it's easier to use, but also SwiftUI is compatible with watchOS, and you can build your own entirely separate watch application. So
Perhaps one of the underestimated points about SwiftUI is it looked like Apple wants you to be able to write like one set of Vue stuff and run it on all their platforms. Like you could do that with roughly the same line of code. So that is, I think, maybe going to make it a lot easier to develop, across all their stuff. Also, watches are getting their own app store and basically becoming more standalone too. So, yes.
Please check out the SwiftUI talks on WWDC. They're awesome.
All right. Anyone else? Maybe one more question or topic.
Oh, by the way, there's also on the Apple developer website, they have a whole tutorial website for using SwiftUI. So it's not just the videos. You can go and download example projects and follow along with a really cool website. You scroll and it just keeps changing and guiding you through using SwiftUI.
Agreed. The website was also really cool.
Yeah.
And if you don't want to use the website, there is a GitHub project to download all the SwiftUI tutorials so that you don't have to use it.
Wow. Or do that too. All right.